She told our waitress I was just a phase. That's how that dinner ended. No breakup, no apology, not even an insult that felt original. Just that line, said over half a glass of Cabernet and a bite of truffle pasta. He's a phase. You know? The stable kind. The kind that teaches you what you don't want. She smiled at the waitress like they were girlfriends at brunch. I was sitting right there, breathing, paying. The waitress glanced at me, awkward and stuck in neutral. I tipped 25% anyway. That was the last time I saw her. A week later, I noticed her text stopped delivering. Her profile picture vanished. I called once straight to voicemail. Tried again the next day. Same. She wasn't missing. She wasn't dead. She was curated silence, the kind you design like a new wardrobe or a personality you wear to networking events. She didn't block me to punish me. She did it because, in her mind, I was done serving a purpose. She called it closure, privately, I'm sure. Ghosting, they call it now. Whatever helps the ego breathe easier. So I sent one final message. Just 5 words. I understand. Take care. Not because I did understand, but because I wasn't going to be her lingering echo. And then I disappeared. No dramatic posts. No rage-fueled poetry. No status updates that screamed, please notice me one more time. I just deleted myself from her story, from every mutual contact. I locked down my socials, forwarded my mail, closed my lease. Quiet, surgical movements like cutting a wire without triggering the alarm. Most people assume silence is weakness, but silence, when done right, is strategy. By the way, if you're hearing this and somehow still not subscribed, more than 97% of people don't hit that button. Takes one tap, but it fuels everything my team builds here. So if you want to hear how this ends, support us. Because this one, it ends without screaming. And those are the stories people remember. Anyway, back to the silence. She probably expected a spiral. Maybe a few months of sad updates. Maybe I'd post some cringy quote about heartbreak and healing and God's timing. Maybe I'd beg her friends to talk to her. But nothing came. Not a single breadcrumb. Because ghosting only works if the ghost haunts something. And I made sure she never heard my chains rattle again. She went on. She joked about it with her new friends. The ones who wore, I'm thriving like perfume. He was nice, but God, so passive. I needed fire, not fog. I heard she called me the beta bridge. The boring guy you date after your wild 20s. But right before you figure out what turns you on. Yeah. She laughed like I was a stepping stone. The irony being, she never checked where that stone led. I moved with intent. Left the state. Burned through my savings, not on booze or therapy, but on learning. Hiking. Building. Rewiring my gut. I let myself rot, then sharpened what remained. Men don't often get praised for silence. We get called cowards or pushovers. But I wasn't quiet because I had nothing to say. I was quiet because I knew she didn't deserve the words I was becoming. She never knew what I did after. And that was the point. She assumed she erased me. But the truth is, her silence didn't destroy me. It removed the last distraction. The last thread I was clinging to out of comfort. And when you lose what you thought you needed, what's left is precision. Because I didn't just move on. I moved up. Quietly. Fully. Strategically. And when I returned years later on that beach, I didn't come back to speak. I came back to show her what silence actually builds. Started subtle. A tag removed here. A shared playlist suddenly missing. Nothing that screamed revenge. Just little digital subtractions that made her scroll back twice. At first, she told herself he was just cleansing. You know, one of those men who reads a self-help book and suddenly thinks he needs to be a minimalist. Or maybe he met someone who didn't like seeing X's on his feed. That thought stung more than it should have. Still, she shrugged and scrolled. Then came the silence that felt engineered. By week 3, her best friend texted, "Weird. I can't find Mark's account. Did he block me?" By week 5, the hiking trip he was planning, the one he'd mentioned casually during that final dinner, was gone from his calendar. So was the part-time teaching gig. His LinkedIn disappeared. Not updated. Deleted. His email, the one tied to all those long Sunday convos, the late-night business schemes, started bouncing. Mailbox not found. It was as if someone had taken a scalpel to his existence and sliced it clean off the internet. "He's just embarrassed," she said aloud once, mostly to herself. Or spiraling. But even she didn't believe it. There's a messiness to spiraling. Chaos leaves fingerprints. Drunk texts. Sloppy venting. Passive-aggressive memes. What she saw, or rather didn't see, felt methodical. like he'd walked backward out of the room, wiping down every surface he'd ever touched. One night, she searched her old photos. Not for nostalgia, just to confirm she wasn't imagining it. Their trip to Santa Fe? Gone. The blurry shot of him holding her coffee in the morning light? Gone. All the albums he'd been tagged in by mutuals had been scrubbed. And when she texted one of them to ask if he'd blocked everyone, the reply came instantly, "Nope, I think he left." Like, left. Her pulse ticked faster than she expected. She knew men who begged, who sent guilt-laced texts, looped playlists, posted brooding quotes like teenagers in midlife crises. She dated men who weaponized their sadness, who needed to be witnessed in pain to justify their next chapter. But this wasn't that. This wasn't heartbreak. This was extraction. A week later, a mutual acquaintance mentioned she'd driven past his apartment. Empty. The blinds pulled up. The walls bare. A faint rectangular shadow still visible where a bookshelf used to lean. The neighbor said he'd cleared out in 2 days flat. Left the key on the counter and the place spotless. Her boyfriend at the time, a real estate entrepreneur who sold NFTs and wore sunglasses indoors, said, "Dude probably went broke." She nodded, played along. But inside, a different thought took root. What if this wasn't collapse, but evolution? She opened his name in her contacts one night. Not to call, just to see it. The last message thread sat frozen. His "I understand. Take care." She'd left it unread on purpose. A little trophy of emotional dominance. Now it looked more like a warning label. That night she had a dream. In it she was knocking on his old door. The hallway was the same, sterile and quiet. But when the door opened, it wasn't him. It was just a mirror. Her own face staring back, older, uncertain. Then a voice behind her whispering, "You taught him silence, and now it's yours to live with." She woke up sweating. It annoyed her how much space his absence was taking up. The guy was boring, predictable, steady to a fault. He'd worn brown shoes with black pants. He double-checked locks and drank green tea like a retiree. He couldn't possibly have pulled off this, right? But the more she tried to dismiss it, the more it tightened around her. The silence wasn't flinching. It wasn't chasing. It was watching, maybe, or maybe not even that. Maybe he had really let go. And that's what scared her the most. Because if he had, then she was no longer the one who ended the story. She was just a footnote he no longer needed. It was one of those lazy Sundays she usually filled with ironic podcasts and overpriced oat milk lattes. She was scrolling without intention, half-skimming a mutual friend's shared blog post about chasing meaning, not followers. Normally, she'd roll her eyes, but the name caught her. M. Alden for grant support and logistics. Her thumb paused mid-swipe. Alden. Couldn't be. Her mind immediately dismissed it. Coincidence. There had to be other M. Aldens in the world, professors, donors, trust fund kids. But her stomach had that flicker of recognition. That tight, electric pull. She scrolled back to the photo at the top. A wide shot, 7 hikers on a ridge in Patagonia. Wind whipping jackets. Sunset bleeding behind them. A gorgeous, cinematic shot. She almost didn't see him at first. He was at the far right, half-turned, wearing a faded cap and hiking pack. The others smiled at the camera. He was looking sideways, like someone had just said something funny off-frame, not posing, existing. The beard threw her off. And the weight loss. He looked leaner, sharper, healthier than she remembered. But it was his posture that hit her. Relaxed, grounded, like someone who had nothing left to chase. She zoomed in until the image pixelated. Her breath tightened without her realizing. That was him. Had to be. The scar on his left forearm from the time he slipped fixing her damn sink. The slight forward tilt when he laughed. She remembered those details in muscle memory, even if she hated admitting it. Her fingers hovered over her keyboard longer than they should have. Finally, she clicked the blog's contact form and typed 3 words. "Is that you?" Then her name. Just her first name. Enough to spark recognition. Not enough to look desperate. She reread the message 4 times before hitting send. There was a brief moment, maybe 2 hours, where she expected a ping. A little blue notification bubble. Cryptic reply, maybe. Even a single-word acknowledgement. But nothing came. No reply. Not even a scene. She refreshed the inbox every few hours like a lab rat pushing a lever. She checked the blog's about page, still up. No updates. She scoured the comments section. looking for any signs of him responding to others. Still nothing. The silence felt different this time. It didn't feel empty. It felt intentional. She reopened the photo and stared at it again. Her current boyfriend wandered in from the kitchen, shirtless and chewing almonds like a caveman. "Whatcha looking at?" "Just a friend," she lied, minimizing the screen. He grunted. "Looks like a cult retreat. You into Patagonia now or something?" She smiled but didn't answer. Her thoughts weren't in the room anymore. She dug through her old files, searching for anything that might connect to him. Emails, calendars, old donation receipts. Nothing. Everything bounced or redirected. His paper trail was vanishing in real time. She even checked his parents' profiles. Still public, still passive-aggressive about politics, still posting about their garden. But no photos of him. No mentions. Just void. The blog post had one last line that haunted her. Alden supported this trip through his new initiative Silence Foundation, which funds minimalist, off-grid experiences aimed at radical personal recalibration. That name, Silence Foundation, was it a coincidence? Or a message? A callback to that final message. "I understand. Take care." Was he quoting her ghosting, now turned into an entire lifestyle? The irony stung. She opened her own Instagram and scrolled to her travel highlight. Drunken selfies in Tulum. Glittery beach parties. Yoga poses she barely held. It all looked juvenile, manufactured, empty. A man she once called forgettable was now quietly funding soul renewal treks across continents. And here she was faking enlightenment for clout. It wasn't guilt she felt. It wasn't even jealousy. It was something colder, displacement, like she'd been cut out of the edit, replaced by someone who belonged to the life she was supposed to be living. Because if that was him in the photo, smiling, wind-kissed and silent, then he hadn't just moved on. He'd evolved. And worse, he hadn't looked back once. It started with a comment at brunch. "Hey, didn't you used to date Mark Alden?" Her friend Olivia asked, eyes on her mimosa but clearly baiting. "Someone told me he's in Denmark or something. Or Norway." She froze mid-sip. "Why?" "Oh, nothing. Just heard he was working with some startup over there. Sustainability or AI or both. I don't know. My husband says their valuation hit like 9 figures last quarter. The numbers didn't land. Not right away." She blinked. "Wait. He's in Europe?" Olivia shrugged. "I think. Someone said he's consulting now. But like quietly. You know Mark. He was always too smart for his own good." The table laughed. A warm ripple of nostalgia for a man they never really knew. She didn't laugh. Her smile flattened like it hit a wall. The next day, she Googled Alden plus startup plus Denmark and got nothing at first. Then she switched to Norway. That's when it popped. A headline on a mid-level tech blog. Green Horizon secures $118 million in Series C. Quiet strategist M. Alden credited with foundational guidance. She clicked the article, heart suddenly thudding too loud. His name was buried halfway through. No photo. No quotes. Just a sentence. Early consulting support from Mark Alden, founder of the Silence Foundation, was reportedly pivotal during Green Horizon's pivot toward decentralized energy planning. She sat back, staring. He wasn't just abroad. He wasn't just doing okay. He was somewhere between ghost and architect, unseen but essential. Her mind clawed for explanations. Had he always been this sharp? This calculated? She remembered the way he used to over-explain things. The awkward metaphors. The long pauses when asked simple questions. Back then, it felt like dead air. Now, it felt like data loading. Her current boyfriend barged into the room barefoot, holding a speaker. "Babe, guess what this AI thing just made me? EDM with cat sounds." He dropped the beat like he'd discovered fire. She shut the laptop. Fast. He noticed. "Work stuff. Just an old contact." He nodded, already scrolling TikTok on his other phone. "You're so intense sometimes. I like that." He said it like a compliment, but it landed like a paper cut. Her hands trembled in her lap, and she hated it. Hated that he still had that effect. Hated how much space he still occupied, not as a man but as a contrast. Her boyfriend now was loud, wild, wore rings on every finger and said things like energy alignment without irony. He posted everything. Mark had posted nothing, and now that nothingness was echoing louder than any club track. She opened her email and searched Mark Alden. Just curiosity. Research. The oldest one still in her inbox was from 4 years ago. Subject line: I think we're running from different things. She didn't remember the body of the message. She deleted it. That night, she found herself scrolling the blog again, the one with the Patagonia photo. It had updated. New photos, new locations. This time, Morocco. A desert trek. Sunset over dunes. There he was again. Smaller this time, wrapped in linen, pouring tea into someone's cup. Same posture. Same profile. Still not looking at the camera. She zoomed in. Next to him was a woman, blonde, sun-kissed, laughing. Her hand brushed his sleeve. She closed the screen. She didn't sleep. Instead, her mind pinged with scenarios she couldn't control. She imagined him giving a talk at some silent retreat, people hanging on his every word. She imagined their first awkward kiss reimagined now with this new woman. Someone who saw him when she didn't. Who didn't roll her eyes when he talked about stillness or gut clarity. Who probably didn't call him safe or predictable. She wanted to believe he'd gotten lucky, that he'd stumbled into something he didn't deserve. But deep down, that old reflex she used to mistake for pride was breaking apart. Because what if this wasn't luck? What if it was always there, and she just walked past it? Worse, what if she taught him how to become this? She had shaped the silence he used as fuel. She had handed him the raw material of his reinvention, and now she was watching him build with it. And that was what kept her staring at a screen long after her boyfriend had passed out. Headphones in, snoring through synth beats and cat meows. It was a Tuesday, and she was already bored of her boyfriend's voice, rattling on about the scalability of influencer real estate. He was halfway through pitching some half-baked scheme involving drones, rental houses, and vertical content, and all she could think about was escape. She scrolled Instagram under the table, pretending to text. Just noise, engagement announcements, gym selfies, girls she didn't like pretending they were happy. Then her thumb stopped. A rooftop photo. Golden hour glow. 2 figures backlit, arms touching. She didn't need to see his face. She knew that stance like a scar. Mark. It was him. Standing on a rooftop overlooking some city that definitely wasn't in the US. Cairo, maybe? Lisbon? He wore that same quiet stillness she remembered. Except now, it radiated presence. The kind that doesn't ask to be noticed. It just is. Beside him, a woman. Slender frame, blonde curls pulled into a loose knot. Long dress fluttering in the breeze. No tags in the image itself, but the caption stopped her cold. Celebrating 2 years. You saw me when I didn't. 2 years. Her chest tensed. Her boyfriend kept talking, oblivious. But if we partner with an AI drone delivery brand, hello, exit strategy. She barely heard him. Her finger tapped the profile name under the post at LaineyRoss_writes. Private account. But the name. Lainey Ross. She stared at it like it was taunting her. Lainey Ross. That name used to buzz around the edges of her memory. Like a song she once hated, but couldn't stop humming. Then it hit her. College. Late spring. One of those networking mixers with cheap wine and too many candles. Lainey had been there, an undergrad a year below, artsy, observant. Too quiet to compete, too smart to need to. She'd caught Mark talking with her at the snacks table, laughing over some obscure travel quote. Nothing overt. But something in the way Lainey listened had irritated her. Later that night, she told him, casually then sharply, not to get too friendly. She's got that desperate creative energy, she'd said. Girls like that latch on. Mark didn't argue. He just nodded, adjusted his glasses, and changed the subject. Now Lainey Ross was standing next to him on a foreign rooftop, the caption reading like an inside joke layered with intimacy. 2 years. That was just a year after she ghosted him. Which meant he hadn't just stumbled into something new. He'd chosen her. Deliberately, quietly, fully. And worse, Lainey had chosen him before he became this. When he was still half-formed. When his bank account probably still blinked red on Sundays. The rage that followed wasn't performative. It wasn't the hot, reactive kind. It was colder, sharper, the kind that slinks into your ribs and sits there, grinning. Because suddenly, her memory wasn't reliable anymore. Every time she'd dismissed Mark as safe, Lainey had probably seen potential. Every time she rolled her eyes at his quiet loyalty, Lainey was probably studying it like scripture. She hadn't stolen Mark. No, that would have required intent. Lainey had simply waited, watched, stepped in when the silence left a gap. And now she got this version of him. The evolved one. The one who wasn't orbiting someone else's validation. The man who had found his core, and then quietly built a life without apology. The worst part? She could see it in the photo. Not just the posture or the clothes or the backdrop. It was in the space between them, how their bodies leaned, the relaxed intimacy of two people who didn't need to pose. She wanted to believe it was staged, that it was branding, a calculated post designed to provoke. But she knew Mark, or had known him, and that man didn't do things for effect. He did things when they were real. She scrolled back through the account. Everything was locked. But the bio read, writer nomad devoted to quiet places and loud minds. Of course she wrote poetry and hiked for inspiration and probably drank green tea without making fun of it. Lainey Ross wasn't competition. She was the mirror. And suddenly, the mirror was clearer than ever. Because if Mark had chosen her, then it wasn't just that he moved on. He moved up, and left her right where she was, surrounded by noise, choking on curated relevance, and realizing too late that silence wasn't surrender. It was strategy. The invitation came wrapped in seafoam green linen paper with gold ink that smelled like cologne samples and old money. Coastal Fundraiser. An evening for ocean innovation. It read, hosted by a former client of hers. Some bland but well-connected VP she once helped during a branding crisis. She wasn't in the mood, but said yes anyway. She needed distraction. Noise. A room full of people who wouldn't remind her of the woman on the rooftop or the man standing beside her. The event was in a rented villa overlooking a private beach, mid-tier luxury, the kind that flex taste without trying too hard. Champagne flutes clicked in every corner. Everyone smelled like fig trees and ambition. She wore white linen pants and a silk halter top that said, "I'm thriving," even if the redness in her wine glass betrayed the truth. She made it exactly 40 minutes before her glass froze mid-air. They were there, not in a corner, not slipping in late. They were already woven into the scene. Him, taller than she remembered, posture straight, confidence sewn into every quiet step. He wore cream linen pants, a pale blue shirt open just enough to catch the breeze, and leather sandals that somehow didn't look ironic. Her Lainey glowed, bare shoulders, that same easy smile, one hand resting on his arm, not possessive, just familiar, like she knew his rhythm, like they had nothing left to prove. She ducked instinctively behind a group near the seafood spread, suddenly aware of how loud her own heart sounded. Maybe they hadn't seen her. Then his gaze lifted. Direct, calm, unapologetic. No flicker, no surprise, just a quiet acknowledgement that burned hotter than any confrontation. He turned away, not rudely, just, finally. She stood there for a beat longer, waiting. She didn't even know for what. For him to come say hello? For a crumb of discomfort? For some sign that she still had weight in his world? But all she got was the back of his shirt, shifting as he walked away toward a circle of people that welcomed him like he belonged. She blinked. The music from the string trio fuzzed in her ears. Her face felt hot. She tried to recompose herself with small talk, wandering toward the dessert trays like she hadn't just been body-slammed by a linen-clad ghost of her past. A woman with a glass of rose struck up a conversation about sustainable reef farming. She nodded, answered, even laughed at the right beats, but her mind kept drifting, like a compass that refused to reorient. She watched them from a distance, trying to read the details. The way he placed his hand at the small of Lainey's back while she spoke to donors. The way they didn't cling, didn't perform affection, but moved around each other like music. Familiar, balanced, unforced. It wasn't some rebound. It was a life, one she'd never even noticed being built. She moved to the edge of the beach, heels sinking slightly into the sand, trying to find silence in the crashing of the waves. But even the ocean couldn't drown out the noise spinning in her head. She thought about all the people she'd discarded like worn shoes, all the phases she'd named over drinks with friends, all the times she'd said, "I need more fire," without realizing she was burning bridges that didn't grow back. And now here he was, a man she'd left behind like background music, standing in front of her like a crescendo. Lainey laughed at something someone said and touched his arm again. He leaned in, said something low, and she threw her head back, unguarded. That laugh was the sound of everything she thought she deserved, in someone else's throat. And he didn't flinch. He didn't need to, because the silence between them wasn't awkward. It was finished. She told herself she was just going to pass by. Maybe grab another drink. Maybe say a polite hello. Something neutral and adult. But her legs moved differently than her mouth planned. And before she knew it, She was walking straight toward their table like someone sleepwalking toward a cliff. They were seated under a canopy of string lights, sharing one of those low conversations that felt like it never really stopped, just paused for air. He sat relaxed, legs crossed, hand cradling a bourbon like it belonged there. Lainey, of course, wore that serene expression people mistake for humility, but she could feel the awareness in her eyes the moment she approached. "Wow," she said, forcing a light tone. "Long time." He looked up, calm, measured, not surprised, just present. He stood. "Good to see you." No hug, no smile, no "how've you been?" Just 4 syllables wrapped in polite steel, followed by a firm, professional handshake like they'd once worked together on a project that ended quietly. The chill of it made her skin itch. Before she could reply, Lainey tilted her head slightly, that polite smile still painted on. "Oh," she said, bright and sharp at once. "You're the one who disappeared on him." A heartbeat, then 2. Her chest compressed like someone had jammed a hand into her diaphragm. "Actually, she started, but her voice cracked mid-defense. She swallowed it back down. They were already turning. Not rudely, not cruelly, just away. As if she had been part of the room, not part of the story. A waiter stepped in with a fresh tray of scallops, offering it to the table like nothing had happened. Mark thanked him softly, passed one to Lainey, and kept speaking to the man on his right about coral reef regeneration grants. His hand didn't shake. His shoulders didn't stiffen. There was no sign, none, that she had ever mattered. She stood there for 3 long seconds, invisible, then turned. Her heels scraped the stone path too loudly as she walked away. She reached the bar and ordered a drink she didn't want, just to feel the weight of a glass in her hand. The champagne fizzed quietly, mocking her with its cheerfulness. She checked her reflection in the glass door beside the patio. Still beautiful, still lean, still dressed like a woman who knew the right angles. But something had cracked, and it wasn't on the outside. Because for years, she had told herself he'd never really let go. That deep down, she'd left a mark he couldn't erase. Maybe even that she'd made him better by hurting him, that familiar myth of being the tragic muse. But standing there, watching him treat her like a footnote in a chapter he'd long finished, she realized something that turned her stomach. She was the only one who thought she was the main character. He wasn't broken. He wasn't bitter. He was free. And worse, he was kind enough not to say so out loud. Lainey had taken one glance and nailed the entire dynamic in a single sentence. "You're the one who disappeared on him. Not his ex. Not the one he loved. Just the girl who ghosted. The girl who left before the good part started." She finished her drink and didn't taste a drop. Across the patio, they laughed again. Soft, real, unbothered. This wasn't just a new chapter. This was a new book. And she hadn't even been invited to read it. They clinked glasses for the sea turtles. Or maybe it was for marine algae. Or kelp farms. She'd stopped listening by the time the second keynote speaker reached his 3rd metaphor about healing the ocean's wounds. The kind of bloated, well-meaning nonsense that usually numbed her into autopilot. But this time, she wasn't floating above it all with a smug smile. She was anchored hard by something far closer than the waves. It happened during the 4th speech. A woman in a teal gown took the mic, thanking everyone for attending and praising the evening's sponsors. The usual suspects, brands, wealthy families, 2 crypto green funds, and then there it was, a very special thanks to the Alden Ross Foundation, whose continued support has empowered dozens of our most ambitious projects. Mark and Lainey, thank you for believing in quiet solutions. Polite round of applause. Mark nodded. Lainey smiled. Her ears rang like someone had slapped her underwater. She turned sharply to the older man beside her, one of the event organizers, and feigned a breezy tone. "Did she say Alden?" He leaned closer, breath thick with Chardonnay. "Yes, Mark Alden. You know him?" She nodded before she could stop herself. "Oh, he and Lainey Ross, yes, they've become quite the pair. Quiet but brilliant. Their foundation's not just a donor. They're building field labs, coordinating coastal relief networks. I mean, Lainey's the heart, but he's the skeleton. You should hear him talk about data modeling for reef resiliency. It's unreal." He chuckled. "She's lucky. They really built something rare." She didn't laugh, just stared straight ahead, into her champagne flute, as the sea and sky blurred into a nauseating shade of gray-blue. Her phone buzzed in her purse. "Chris? 9:16 p.m. You ghosting me now?" She locked the screen without reading the rest. Her boyfriend, current, loud, exhausting, was halfway across the venue, performing a crypto rant for 2 unfortunate donors. He wore a shirt unbuttoned to his solar plexus and said, "Disruption," like it was a sacrament. He didn't notice she hadn't returned in 20 minutes. He didn't notice her at all. But someone else did. Lainey, glancing her way, not smug, not territorial, just aware. That kind of awareness that comes from having won a long time ago. She felt a rush of something bitter slide up her throat. Not just envy, not just regret. This was collapse. Silent, invisible, a slow internal folding. Because now it wasn't just that Mark had moved on. It was what he'd become without her. He hadn't upgraded. He had transcended. And the woman beside him, she hadn't replaced her. She'd erased her. That was the real shift. Not just in status or money or social weight. It was that the man she once dismissed, smiled through, humored, now sat at the center of a table she couldn't even approach without losing oxygen. She'd walked away from a man with the map to something vast. And now he'd used it, without her. And here she was, a guest, a footnote, a dress, a glass of champagne in a hand that trembled just enough to be noticed, if anyone still cared to look. The sky turned to gold like it was mocking her. Too beautiful, too cinematic. One of those sunsets people try to trap in photos but never quite capture. She stood barefoot now, heels in hand, toes pressed into the cooling sand. Champagne long gone, phone forgotten. The sound of waves brushing the shore should have been calming. But instead, it just emphasized how loud her head had become. They hadn't spoken, not really. Not since the handshake. Not since Lainey's quiet cut across the table. Not since the foundation's name was called like a coronation. She kept watching the horizon, pretending she wasn't waiting. Then he appeared. Not dramatically, not with purpose, just walking. Like the ocean was his and the evening was a route he already knew by heart. No audience, no performance. Just linen sleeves rolled halfway, skin golden from the day's light, steps steady and sure. He didn't detour toward her. He didn't slow. She turned before she lost the nerve. "Why didn't you ever say anything?" He stopped. It was the first time he really looked at her. Not the glances from across the room. Not the polite nod. Not the brief, transactional "good to see you." This was different. His eyes didn't hold anger. They didn't hold longing either. And that hurt more. No spark. No ashes. Just stillness. Like she was no longer part of the equation. His voice was soft. Precise. "Because silence," he said, "was the only language you ever taught me." She couldn't breathe for a second. Like the words had taken something physical from her. He didn't wait for a response. He just kept walking. Not fast. Not triumphant. Just forward. As if that sentence, those 12 words, were the last page of a chapter she hadn't realized was still open. She stood there until the sea washed the light from the sky. Until her legs hurt and the chatter of the event faded behind her. Until she understood, truly, the difference between being ghosted and being forgotten. Ghosting implied mystery, hope, a maybe. This was conclusion. Not cruel. Just clean. And no matter how many questions still itched under her skin, she finally knew one thing with clarity. He didn't need to be heard. Because the silence was the answer. And it had spoken louder than she ever did. He didn't look back. Not once. That was the detail that would haunt her. The quiet, absolute certainty in his steps as he moved away, like he was done orbiting a memory. The crowd behind her was still murmuring, half drunk on champagne and self-importance. But all she could see was him, framed by the last light of the evening. He slipped off his sandals, handed one to Lainey, and said something that made her laugh. The kind of laugh that didn't echo, didn't reach for attention. Just joy, simple and unfiltered. Her throat tightened. For years she'd convinced herself that walking away first was power. That silence, wielded like a blade, meant control. But this was different. His silence wasn't armor, it was evolution. He hadn't used it to hide. He'd used it to build, to grow, to erase her without hatred. They reached the shoreline, where the waves licked at the sand. He took Lainey's hand, and for a second, their reflection rippled against the surf. Two silhouettes fused into one long, moving shape. Then another wave rolled in, and they dissolved into the water's shimmer. Gone. No grand revenge. No speech. No confrontation. Just absence perfected. The kind of ending that didn't require applause. She thought of every message she'd left unanswered, every conversation she'd ended with a smirk instead of a sentence. She remembered the way he used to look at her when she spoke. Not because he wanted to reply, but because he wanted to understand. And she'd mistaken that patience for weakness. Now she realized it was the same patience that had built the life she was watching walk away. The noise in her chest wouldn't quiet. It was the static of a story ending where she no longer belonged. People around her started to leave. Lanterns flickered out one by one, the beach falling into that heavy twilight that blurs faces and erases edges. Still she stayed, watching the horizon darken. He'd found peace not by punishing her, but by never needing to. That was the worst part. His silence wasn't an echo of pain. It was proof of closure. A silence she could never answer because it was complete. She finally turned back toward the villa, the last strings of the quartet playing somewhere distant. The sand clung to her feet, damp and cold. She realized she didn't even know what she'd say if she could start over. There was no apology large enough, no explanation clean enough to bridge the space between who she was then and who he'd become now. He was whole, and she was left standing in the same old noise, replaying the sound of her own ghosting and hearing, for the first time, what it really was. Not victory. Just the sound of something precious slipping quietly out of her reach forever.